My name is Ben Schlegel. I am from Nerd Street Gamers and the head of events and programming.
Hi guys, I'm Pete Powell. I'm the chief of staff also at Nerd Street Gamers.
Hi everybody, I'm Steve Kramarck. I'm with the University of Delaware. I'm an associate director with our University Student Center, specializing in student media, radio, newspaper, and as of this year, esports.
Hey everyone, I'm Chris McLendon, also with Nerd Street Gamers. I'm our partnership activation manager here. Excited to be here.
I'm Sarah Williams. I'm out in Colorado, Denver, Colorado, the general manager of our Localhost, one of our venues at Nerd Street Gamers.
We're going to get started with Ben Schlegel here. He's going to introduce us, and he's kind of going to explain to us what esports is as a whole and the opportunities involved within esports.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for hosting us today. I appreciate it, all of your hard work that's gone into this. I am Ben Schlegel. I'm the head of events and programming for Nerd Street Gamers, and I realize what it takes to take an in-person event and get it up in line. So the lift that you all did today to get us here is pretty impressive, and the reach, right, that you've thus gotten with the digital event. So great work on today by everybody. But yeah, so what is esports, right? And what does that mean and what does that encompass? So esports is really it's the competitive play of video games or PC games, either by an individual or a team. And with that, it's very similar to what you would see in traditional sports, where there are winners and losers, there's officials, there's infrastructure, there's thoughts, there's models that kind of all go into that. And competitive integrity is really at the core of everything that we do at Nerd Street and esports in general. So esports is taking the video games and putting it in a competitive form that is fair and open to everybody. One of the more niche things is what is Nerd Street Gamers, right? And what do we do with esports, and how do we fit into this bigger picture? Nerd Street Gamers overall is a gateway for esports. So, we are the first thing that you might see when you're interacting with an esports brand for the first time. We are a organization that focuses on, and as we continue to build our programming and thought process out of, fitting within and standardizing and giving legitimacy to, a pathway for amateur players to take. So somebody that start as a child or as a young adult, and make sure that they are properly coached, that they have access, that they are able to get a lot of the resources that you see in traditional sports, and that's teamwork and bringing people together. So that's a little bit about what Nerd Street Gamers is and what we're looking to do. But we really we want to be the people that bring esports to everybody, and we want to lower the barrier. And we want to make sure that we uphold integrity in everything that we do.
Awesome, Ben. Thank you so much for that insight on what esports as a whole is and the opportunities that are involved. So we actually have a question here in the chat, and we're moving to Sarah next. And this question kind of goes towards you. The question is, what are some differences with esports from the pre-pandemic to now? And you can answer that question and go over what we discussed about.
Hey, yeah, absolutely. So at my place, we're a venues, we facilitate live events. So we're trying to foster and facilitate communities to grow. Since the pandemic, we haven't been able to have anyone in our venue. So a lot of that shifted to Ben's team to online sports. So with the pandemic, it's how do we kind of get those communities together without them actually seeing each other. So his team has worked really hard on getting like Discords, on getting different channels, on like finding communities, because a lot of people, they're at home. They don't know where to go. There's information overload if you try to find somewhere to go. So a lot of what they do is try to get people into the community, because with Nerd Street Gamers, we're all for making people on the path to pro, but it's also the experience on the way. because anyone can sit at home and grind for hours, but it's not the same as when you have someone to like virtually like encourage and like talk about things with. So that's a big part of what Nerd Street also goes for. Coming up for post-pandemic, it's going to be very interesting as we open, because we are very closely watching like what the government's releasing as to how can we facilitate large events again. Because Friday nights in Denver, we could easily have close to 300 people playing different games. What does that look like going forward? Obviously, we have to have different cleaning standards. How do we space everyone out? So it's going to be very interesting going forward. But we're definitely adjusting the best we can. And Ben's team did great. They got online events within a week of everywhere shutting down. So we're getting there. I don't think we can hear you, Brady.
You're muted, Brady.
Whoops. Thank you for that, Sarah. Thanks for that insight. For Chris, can you talk about how you got to where you are today and why you chose the esports path, and maybe talk about the sponsorship aspect that you work within?
It's like Chris is frozen. Either that or he doesn't know how to respond to your question. Brady.
It's okay. We can get back to Chris. It looks like he's frozen. Maybe his Wi-Fi shut off. Oh, there we go.
Is.
Sorry, guys.
Sorry.
Internet issues all week.
It's no worries.
No problem.
Did you happen to hear the question?
I did not. I'm sorry.
Okay. It's no worries. It's no worries. I was just gonna ask if you could talk about how you got to where you are today, and maybe why you chose the esports path, and talk about maybe the sponsorship aspect that you're involved in.
Absolutely. So yeah, I started in traditional sports. I spent the last 6 years prior to Nerd Street with the Philadelphia Flyers. I worked in various roles in the sales, service, retention departments, working in ticketing, which was an amazing experience. And I always knew I had always planned to work in traditional sports. I knew esports existed, and I knew it was booming. So I always had an interest, but when I heard about the Philadelphia Fusion coming to Philadelphia, and then I heard about Nerd Street Gamers and Comcast Spectacor's investment in them, it really piqued my interest. So I had a relationship with Pete and some of the other guys over here, and it was a natural fit. So I was excited to come on board and, at the ground floor and build something special. And, I think we have so far. And what was the second part of your question?
I was going to ask you to talk about maybe the sponsorship aspect of Nerd Street and esports.
Yeah, sure. So, my job here is to manage our sponsorship activations. And, it's a really exciting time, in traditional sports. I'm sure we're all familiar with, how sponsorships work, and, you see Bud Light and things, plastered everywhere. Esports is very similar in a lot of aspects, but it's very different in a lot of others. We use the terms endemic and non-endemic when it comes to sponsorships. The gaming companies of the world and the equipment companies that build PCs and that stuff, they're very familiar with esports. But there's a ton of other companies out there, big companies, that are really just now dipping their toes in the water. So it's collaborating with them and figuring out, what their goals are and what audiences they want to reach. In sports, you kind of have an idea of what your demographic is. Esports is very fragmented. It's almost like the music industry. Each video game is its own sport. Your Counter-Strike fans are not necessarily the fans of League of Legends. And the demographics range. So you kind of have to work with these companies, understand that, they don't necessarily have a ton of knowledge in this area. And frankly, we're still learning as well. So trying to figure out what makes the most sense, experiment, it goes far beyond just running ads and putting up billboards and things like that. It's trying to find a way that they can engage with our gamers, and the gamers that are going to be sitting in front of a computer or a TV screen for 4 hours playing video games. It's an unbelievable opportunity for them, and it's something, you know, they're really excited about.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris, for that insight. And we actually have a question for you here. If you would like to answer this, what is the biggest adjustment from selling hockey to esports when it comes to engaging and relating to the clientele?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, when it came to selling hockey, it was a very transactional process. People knew what they were getting. Esports, so far at least, it's tended to be, you know, it's a longer process. And like I had mentioned, it's, you know, we're in the position now where we can test things. You know, in the National Hockey League, and, you know, everything's very standardized. You know, here we have that freedom to kind of see what's working, try something. You know, we're going to fail. You know, things aren't going to work out perfectly, but I think brands and sponsors are understanding of that. And, you know, it makes that aspect, you know, pretty exciting. So I would say that's probably the most, you know, the biggest difference.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Chris. Thanks for the insight. And then we have a question for you, Steve. Can you maybe talk about esports in college, and maybe if you're allowed to give scholarships? Is esports ran similar to traditional sports?
Sure, and to riff off of something that Chris said, first of all, go Flyers. Second of all, one of the things that Chris mentioned was something that's a little bit of a complicating factor for doing it as a collegiate enterprise, and that is, so when you think of a traditional sport, nobody owns baseball, nobody owns hockey. But when you're talking about esports, the publishers own these games. So League of Legends, that company owns that game, and they determine which league can facilitate competition in it. So for that reason, we competed in 4 different leagues this semester in different titles, from League of Legends to Hearthstone, Overwatch, and Rocket League, because nobody does own it. The other thing that's different in the college landscape, especially around esports, is the NCAA, for the most part, yet doesn't want to get too involved. Some schools, NCAA, some schools are doing it out of their athletic department, but most schools are running it out of their student life or their student centers in our case, because NCAA is steering away because of Title IX issues, and also because what's different with esports competitors, even in the college setting, is they can earn revenue, whether they can earn revenue on their own streams or win prize money from winning a league or winning a competition. So that's something that's made it a little bit different. For our perspective, we're running it out of student life, but we are treating it as a competitive sport, to use the word. So we have tryouts, we have coaches, we have uniforms, we're in leagues with schedules. We're looking at a major within the institution that will be a multidisciplinary major that will include sports management. So we're treating it like athletics in many respects, although we understand the differences too. The people that are doing esports have a totally different skill set. They're not necessarily going to dunk a basketball, but somebody that is on the basketball team probably can't do the finesse and stay with the fine motor skills that are needed to compete in, say, Overwatch. You asked about scholarships. We're new. This is our first year in it. We're experimenting or exploring seed money for scholarships, but that's probably something that's down the road for us a couple of years. We also don't have any staffing currently. We're using our existing student center staff for this. So I specialize in student media, but I have a background in traditional sports and a love of gaming. So I got pulled into it. We have a younger associate who is going to run the day-to-day operations of our 1,800 square foot facility. But ultimately, we hope to bring in scholarship money. We hope to bring in positions. And we already know that it's had an impact with admissions. So as enrollment is pushed by this, we expect that we'll be able to get some positions down the line. So hopefully I answered your question.
Awesome. You did. Thank you so much for that and your insight within college and esports. It's a very different way of viewing things. And then we kind of have a broad question for you, Pete, and it's kind of just what's the future of esports? What's the opportunities involved, and what's the future? I know there's a lot to come.
Well, first off, Brady, thanks again for having me today. Hi, guys. And just in case you're wondering, yes, I am wearing a full suit shoes and all. I'm not going to get up and show you because that would be weird, but just take my word for it. It was nice to dress up today. It's been a while. And, working in esports, a lot of us, do dress down pretty much all the time. And it's become sort of second nature. So being quarantined at home is pretty much like the same stuff you wear when you go into work anyway. But anyway, Brady, to your point about the future of the industry and even more so, I think the easiest way to answer it is most of us have no idea because of the fact that this industry is very much the Wild West. And it has been now for probably the last 5 or 6 years since it really started taking off and the first pro league started forming. A lot of people are now comparing, sort of the life cycle of esports to if it was a baseball game, right? If we were in the baseball game of esports, we most likely would be in like the top of the second inning right now. So we've really only played one full inning. We obviously have a lot of pro leagues established. We have a lot of, I'd say a lot of money flowing in to the industry through sponsorships, and Chris could attest to that. That's for sure. But, one of the things that I think Nerd Street, our team is really trying to do is build the infrastructure behind all of those pro leagues. So when you think about us, it's really more about the sustainability of not just an Overwatch league or a Call of Duty league, but the sustainability of esports in general. When you think about the traditional sports, the NFL, the NBA, they obviously operate at a very high level, and they all are, basically print money when you get to that level in terms of what they can command from a television standpoint, from a sponsorship standpoint. But people tend to forget that if you didn't have college football, college basketball, and the NCAA, you wouldn't have pipelines directly tied to the NBA and the NFL. And the same if you kind of take a step back and you go to, Pee Wee football and high school basketball. You need pipelines for those D1 college programs. So what we're really trying to do is we're trying to develop the pipeline for these gamers to become not only competitive, but to play at a level that allows them to have an opportunity to compete professionally. And, we say it all the time, if you want to be a pro baseball player when you grow up, 5 or 6 years old, mom or dad goes and signs you up your town's little league field, right? You play little league, then you go to Babe Ruth, Legion ball, high school. And thing is with esports right now, there is no little league. There's no little league fields for you to go play. So what we're trying to do is obviously give kids the opportunity to be able to go to our facilities, compete with other kids that might be playing at the same level they are, develop that sense of community where you're making friends the same way you're making friends when you play Little League. So, Brady, it's a very open-ended question when I think about the future. I know that there won't be a future if there isn't a pipeline of talented people that want to continue to game competitively. But if that happens, and at Nerd Street we're making sure we're working very hard to make sure it does. I do feel confident that esports and traditional sports are going to be pretty parallel in the not too distant future.
And just to to go off Steve and Pete's points, and they bring up really great things, right? Is what does that infrastructure look like, and what does that setup look like? And right now, you look at things like soccer and hockey and baseball, right? There's these pipelines that are out there, and a lot of the existing esports infrastructure is very, it's siloed. It's people are maybe caught in a specific way that things should need to be done. And one of the biggest things I think is, we're in the first iteration of everything we do. And you need to be comfortable living in that world. I know the stuff that I implement is going to change, that there's going to be problems. There's things we're going to have to fix. So, to Pete's point, like we're in the second inning, like, yeah, like this is the first go around, and we're all learning. We do look to existing things that we know that work for processes and thoughts. I've made some right assumptions that have paid off thus far, and I've made some wrong assumptions, and I'm going to make more wrong assumptions, and that's okay. But looking at things like the American development model, right, and people that are familiar with youth sports or coaching, and what does that pathway look like? And really for us, being a gateway to esports, we want to create a pathway to guide members to become future champions, essentially. And what is that? What age groups do those break down to? How does that break down to? Do you have to be competitive? Can it also be for fun? And then when you become an adult, how do you turn around and give back to that same community and become a mentor, in that community? So for us, it's really, we need to create that pathway that exists for all these other sports. We need to legitimize it and also fall into the best practices that's worked for other traditional sports, but also be aware that this is its own unique animal at the same time.
We've had similar discussions. Within a month of launching, we were approached by different school districts. In fact, we invited a lot of those school districts to our grand opening, but building a K-12 infrastructure beneath us is certainly a goal, because that's going to be a feeder into the college program. I can tell you that right before, actually probably in the first week of the pandemic when we were locked out, we started to have conversations with local government officials that are looking to, how can we do summer camps for this for youth? How can we incorporate this into, rec leagues, things like that. So those conversations, I think we're on the cutting edge of it. That second wave of people that are trying to get into the mix, the local governments and K through 12 folks, they're right behind us. So I think the infrastructure is going to be coming as soon as we're, back to somewhat of a normal world.
Got it. We have one question coming in. It's just like, do you guys foresee the pandemic speeding up the growth of the esports, since people are spending too much time at home and having more time to try new things and they haven't before? So like this could go for like esports players or just the company. So if you guys want to talk about that.
Our problem has been less with the players. They all have pretty good setups in their houses. All of our competitors were ready to go. The problem is the infrastructure on some of the leagues, especially the ones that are based in New York, have had problems getting people to the office to facilitate. You can do a lot from home, but you can't do everything from home. So all of our leagues, other than one, shut down shortly after the pandemic, just because they didn't have the horsepower to keep things running. And so we're down to one league right now that's moving into another tournament, and then we'll be done after that. I don't know what Nerd Street folks might say about that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, in a lot of ways, it has become a major opportunity, for us to innovate. I would say a few months ago, I don't think we had necessarily any plans to run online tournaments and that kind of stuff. And this has really been a great, opportunity for us to test it out, and it's been working extremely well. One of the core missions of Nerd Street is to turn the casual gamer into a competitive gamer. The competitive gamers are out there, but 90% of them are your regular Joe at home just playing Call of Duty with his friends. So how do we get that guy to come on out to one of our facilities and compete? But maybe the first step there is running online tournaments where, he may be comfortable playing at home. So we're definitely seeing part of that. And I think, we're seeing it all over the place. People are gaming, the celebrities, the pro athletes, everybody enjoys gaming. So that has also really helped, and I think will continue to help grow esports. So that was,
And Chris raises a good point, guys, because, we talk about this pivot that we, through the work of Ben's team and everybody, it's been an all hands on deck type of thing, to pivot our business to run these online tournaments, since everything got shut down. But at our core, Chris is right. We're a live events company. We're a brick and mortar retail company. And therefore we need to be able to have people gather. And the whole point to Chris's point, being able to convert that person to a competitive gamer is that, you can play online really all you want. If you want to get to a point competitively where you're, moving up leaderboards and getting the opportunity to maybe even play pro, you're going to play in live events. You're going to play at in-person tournaments with spectators, fans screaming, just like they do at, traditional sporting events. And, there's a certain, competitive, Ben talked about competitive integrity, the aspect of just knowing that, you need to be able to run these games, very high speed broadband internet access. And in a lot of cases, being able to have the same internet and without latency issues or anything like that, and an in-person tournament levels the playing field. When you're playing online at home, if you have a higher speed internet service than your buddy who you're playing online, you're going to have a competitive advantage. So, the essence of what we're trying to do here is get people out of their basements, is bring people together. Obviously right now it's an extremely challenging time to do that, but we're confident that, there has been no other point in time, I think, in American history where this many people have been playing video games than we have the last month. So we're confident that that's going to be overall good for our business. And when things open back up, good for what we're trying to achieve with our mission.
Yeah.
And think about it like, go ahead, Chris.
No, go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, like with, and Pete hit the nail on the head, competitive integrity. And when you're in person, our ability to ensure competitive integrity is a lot better because we don't know what's happening in your living room, right? And then, on the other end of it too, think of it from a player standpoint, like you put an NBA player on the court when the building's empty, he's going to hit 99% of shots on that court. But you put him in front of a crowd, all of a sudden his free throw percentage is 75, 80%. So there's the competitive integrity part, and then there's the part of just the players. You have to learn how to compete at a high level with that pressure in front of people, in those types of situations.
And I was just going to touch on, more of the sponsorship aspect and kind of how this situation has become, an opportunity for us and esports as a whole. You think of March Madness that was canceled, all the sponsors that lost out on it. There was nothing March Madness was going to do to pivot and make that work. We are still able to, run events online. In fact, after this call, I'm going to send a report to some of our partners and show them, look, like, yeah, we're not running, these in-person live tournaments, but look how much engagement we're still getting online. Look at all, how many views we're getting now. Our web traffic is up 900%. So yeah, we may not be able to have these events, but your sponsor dollars are still, going to work for you. And in fact, in a lot of ways, you're getting a ton more exposure. I think we spoke about, in our weekly meeting, we have facilities in Pennsylvania, Colorado, but the people participating in our tournaments are from all over the country now. And some of the top ones are California and Texas, places, we don't necessarily have a brick and mortar store. So, for us, it's even been in some ways a great opportunity.
Great, thank you guys. I have a question for Steve. If the NCAA goes ahead to eventually approve name and likeness countrywide, will that give esports a niche to be able to compete as a traditional sport through the athletic department?
I think it depends on what the restrictions that the NCAA puts on things will be, because the culture of esports is that you will not get the best players competing in college if they can't make some kind of money, whether it's on their own or as part of the team. It's not a huge thing for what we do, but if that is a rule, if the NCAA doesn't allow them to make some money, it's probably a non-starter. The other issue that you might get with NCAA is Title IX. You could have a co-ed team, I suppose. They'd have to lay the structure for that, but esports does tend to be very male dominant. It's an issue that we're looking at on our end. We have females involved with the program, but certainly not to the degree that we would like. So the NCAA would have to come up with some pretty strong guidelines for how the teams would be structured. But if they get past both the Title IX and the amateurism aspect of it, I could certainly see, and in fact, I've heard some conferences already pushing for it to be housed in their athletic department in hopes that the NCAA will pick it up, whereas others, the athletic department, like Delaware, for instance, our athletic department is a great partner for us, but they didn't want esports. They were perfectly happy to have us have it for now.
Gotcha. So how has the Success Esports been with having a venue being built in Philadelphia?
I was going to say, what, if you don't mind, we could start there with our larger facility, and maybe Sarah weigh in with how things have been in Denver, and then maybe Ben or Chris could touch on our Philly location.
Yeah, and so it's just like, what is the success that they felt? Sorry, just making sure I'm getting the question right. I heard
Yes.
Philadelphia. No.
Yes.
So out here in Denver, we have grown in attendance every week. Just since we've only opened in December 2018. So we've got about 18,000 square feet. We have 112 PCs that can run at a time. Every Friday night, we have a really large Smash community. They play Smash Brothers. We have close to 150 players that would come every week. If you look back a year ago, we were nowhere near those numbers. That had to do with fostering communities and offering the games that people actually wanted, such as we started competing with Apex recently, and that helped our numbers grow as well. A lot of our big push of what we do is that we're trying to make it affordable for everybody. So keeping events at a rate that people can afford to play at, and keeping hourly rentals where people can afford it, it brings a different group of people in, because not everyone can afford a $3,000 PC at home or the internet they need to really play. So like with our venue, we found a lot of really good success, especially like our Fortnite community's grown, and those are kids' parents have to drive them. They drive over an hour to get to us some weekends. And that's kind of fostering a good experience, because then they can all get to know each other, and we kind of work on them with rage quitting and smashing and yelling at each other, stuff you can't do online, but that's definitely needed in person. Philadelphia, I'm not sure if someone who's over there has anything.
Yeah, I can touch on Philly a little bit. So, one, our success in Denver is largely attributed to Sarah. So just to put that out there, it comes down to having good people and the right culture and the right fits and persistence. We've grown every week in Philadelphia, but when I'm looking at programming and how we're going to organically build this, this company and get people to our venues, it all has to do with the experience, and that starts with the people that you bring in. I was lucky enough, Sarah was my second hire, right? My first hire was a coordinator that reported to Sarah. And by making that culture change, and by being persistent, and by focusing on community and people, they've been able to, project our growth there exponentially. So that's, just kind of just some overarching thoughts on Denver. Now to focus on Philly, a lot of people, we have great partners in Comcast and Spectacor and whatnot that are involved in the professional esports realm in Philadelphia. So they are partners of us, and they're building the Fusion Arena, right? And that's in the news, and that's getting publicity. And that's good for us, because anytime we're building just overall awareness about esports, that's helping our cause. Now, day to day, are we operating that facility? Absolutely not. But what comes into play is for our facilities, which are a little bit more scaled option, is that it is a scalable option for these esports. So what we're seeing is Overwatch League, for instance, is going into traditional theaters. It's costing hundreds of thousands of dollars to convert these theaters into esports venues. Why not provide them with an option that is much more scalable to what their needs are? So think about Little League, right? Little League, you have your community field, you have maybe your high school field that has a little bit nicer dugouts, you have your traveling field, you have college, so on and so forth. So we want to fit into that, kind of middle ground of, hey, we're the high school esports venue, we're the minor league esports venue. We're going to give you a pro level feel, and we're going to give you the best service when you're there. But it's about that scalability and making sure that the financial numbers, meet up with what they're trying to accomplish long term. Because we're all growing, we're scaling, right? There's a lot of capital involved, but eventually this thing has to make financial sense for people. So giving them the venues to do that in is extremely important.
And I think, guys, what everything Ben just touched on in terms of what's going on in Philly, is, I think, just my opinion, what's going to make Philly the esports center of the universe. Well, maybe not the universe, but at least on the East Coast. Right now, the LA, Southern California has been sort of the center of things when it comes to the industry for at least very early on. With the Overwatch League being based out there, a lot of small esports startups that are based in the LA area. But between what Ben referenced with Comcast building the Fusion Arena, obviously Tucker Roberts, Brian Roberts' son, who heads up Spectacor's gaming division, is a big video game guy himself, and he has a mission that he wants to fulfill. And frankly, what we're trying to achieve at Nerd Street, you combine all of our forces for good, and I really think that we're going to put Philly on the map, not just maybe on the East Coast, but maybe the entire country when it comes to the esports industry.
Thank you for that, you guys. We have a question here from Will Bomer for the Nerd Street guys. Does Nerd Street Gamers use Play 2 at Chicky and Pete's in South Philly? And other than that, and Localhost, what other facilities are there in Philadelphia that you folks use?
Yeah, so in Philadelphia, familiar with Play 2. I think Pete's probably even organized, a couple corporate outings there probably at some point in his career. But what you're looking at, Play 2, it's interesting. And they were kind of, maybe a little ahead of their time here with, very casual, it's console-based gaming. You're able to go there. It's, you rent out for a corporate party, you go there on a Friday night. It's next to a bar. You have some, a couple beers. Like it's a different type of venue though than what we're trying to craft, where that's a very casual situation. But you wouldn't go there, right, to train for the Olympics or, to become a college athlete. It's not the gym. Think about the persistence and what it takes to become a high level athlete, in general. And you need those facilities to meet that. So yes, Play 2, and we need places like that. And we run, casual programming too, because you need to make sure you hit all those markets. But it's really two different things where they're there more for like the sips and fun type of deal. And we're trying to, show people a legitimate pathway to how to partake in esports, how to grow it, and how to move the scene forward.
And along those lines, there are LAN centers everywhere. They're continuing to pop up. But I think the difference is, to Ben's point, is really the feel of the facility. A lot of these LAN centers, and no offense to them or anything, is they tend to be quite small, dark, dingy. You're almost in a cave type of a feel when you're in one. Part of our mission is large facility, high ceilings, gives you this feel that you are in like an arena, a gym. That I think separates us and doesn't make us necessarily competitors of them, because we do need those to exist.
Got it. We have a next. Oh, sorry about that. Go ahead.
Okay. No, I was gonna say, just to backtrack in real brief, one of our biggest differentiators between us and other LAN centers is we are programming based. where they are much more an hourly model where they come in and they expect people to rent PCs. For us, we want a program space. So we think more along the lines of like a Live Nation, right? We own venues, we're taking risk, we're programming events, we're getting people to come out. So that's a major differentiator between us and the other just, general.
And with that programming, we're able to also, in our current facility on North 3rd Street, aka Nerd Street, we have a production studio. Basically, I should say a production room and a studio. In our new Localhost, it's going to be a bigger, better version of that. But to be able to, obviously broadcast our events, Ben referenced live, is obviously a major thing, differentiator, and as well as any side programming that we're able to do with streams on Twitch or anything like that. It's been really nice to have, a stage and a production room in order to sort of build our own little esports network as well.
Got it. So Pete, we have a question coming in for you that what are the ownership or investment opportunities within esports, and namely with a team or organization, and how do you go about finding those opportunities?
Well, first off, if anybody wants to write us a check today, we'd be more than happy to take it. But please, by all means, that is a great question. And, I guess the easiest way to answer it is that the industry overall is full of investment opportunities right now. Now, from a public-facing perspective, there's only 2 or 3 esports companies that are publicly traded currently. Super League Gaming, Allied Esports. There's a couple, but there's probably going to be quite a few more in the years to come. A lot of companies right now are playing the waiting game when it comes to IPO because of obviously, amongst other things, the state of the world. But our company is very much, started as venture capital backed, which basically means that we had a private group of investors that showed an interest in us very early on in our development. We call them seed investors, and they believed in us. They believed in John Fazio, our CEO and founder, and his vision for what Nerd Street Gamers could be in terms of being an esports infrastructure company and not being tied to just one publisher or one game. But we've been very fortunate in that we took on venture capital money to kind of get going, but then we've had we've been blessed to add some really larger corporate investors to our mix as well. So Ben referenced and Ben and Chris both referenced Comcast Spectacor obviously has a vast portfolio now of esports companies, and we're proud to be one of them, as well as Five Below. For those of you that aren't aware, Five Below isn't just an investor in us. They're also a strategic partner. We're in the process of opening stores alongside Five Below, or I should say, taking some of Five Below's store space and creating sort of mini versions of our LAN centers that we call Localhost. So, in the next few months, hopefully things get open again. You guys are going to start to hear about some Five Below locations across the country that are going to have dedicated esports space. And that is going to be us, Localhost and Nerd Street Gamers. So, we've had, again, we've been blessed with a really good group of investors. In terms of just other opportunities outside of the publicly traded areas, guys, you really have to be a venture capitalist or the ability to cut a fairly large check. Just my personal opinion, there's a lot of esports startup companies out there right now that are obviously looking to fundraise, but I would just caution against, I don't want to say that a bubble is coming, but when you look at the landscape right now of where we are, just from a macroeconomic standpoint, not just esports, there's a lot of capital that's on the sidelines right now, and a lot of these esports companies that have tied them, hitch their wagon to one game or just live events or just brick and mortar retail. Frankly, it's going to be tough for them to survive what's going on with this pandemic and an extended closure. So, I would just, sort of put a word of caution out there for anybody that's thinking about investing in esports. You really want to, at this point in time, you really want to do your homework, as the only the strong survive, sort of separate themselves from the rest of the industry in the next couple of years here.
So I want to follow along with this next question. I'm actually pretty intrigued to hear this answer. Could amateurism keep competitive gaming from the NCAA?
I think that's what's kept it away so far. But I do think the NCAA is leaning towards relaxing some of their rules regarding what athletes can get as far as payments for certain services. So I think that if the NCAA is comfortable with the culture of esports, where the athletes do market themselves through outside channels and do receive money for competitions, then I think the NCAA, if they see dollars in it, will get involved. But for now, that's been one of the things that's kind of kept them away, as it really is opening Pandora's box. But I think the bigger sports, the footballs and basketballs, are going to drive that discussion. If those athletes start to get more of the permission to do things, then I think you'll eventually see NCAA look at esports a little closer.
And just to kind of go off Steve, and I think, that's a huge point, right? Is like, what does that look like? My hope is 10 years from now that it's the esports athletes that are driving this change in the NCAA. That there's such an audience out there that they're going to have to think about how they're structuring and how they're taking care of their athletes differently. So if we get to a point where there's such a large audience for esports, it might be esports that spurs the football player to get payment, because that's how they're going to have to incorporate it into NCAA. So that's my like 10-year hopeful wish list, is that eventually esports is the one that's pushing for payment in the NCAA and makes the difference.
Another question. What do you, this is for anybody, what do you guys see as the next emerging market / game type in the esports industry?
Well, certainly, I mean, I'll let the other crew answer this one, but in my mind, what's been extremely hot lately has obviously been Valorant and Call of Duty Warzone, just taking the industry by storm. And talk about perfect timing, coming out while everybody's home. It's just, taking on a life of its own. But, I'll throw it out there to the rest of the group.
Definitely hearing Valorant on my end from our players. They're already asking us if we can have a varsity team in that. We're not ready to have a 5th team just yet.
And there's two really things I think you want to take into account when you're looking at titles and intellectual property. There's open source, right? And then there's closed source. So I would really, if I was creating a game, I would want it open source. I would want to get it so that it can go out and organically grow. And that's what you see with games like CS. We're starting to see it with Valorant. Closed systems are much more resemble Overwatch, Fortnite, stuff like that. So that's really a huge differentiators. What is open source and what is closed as far as games go?
And crossplay has been huge too. I mean, when you think about Warzone, guys, you can play. We do it now. We have company happy hours, Warzone. Who's on a PC? Who's on a PlayStation or an Xbox? One of the great things about it is it's crossplay. So it doesn't matter if you're on a console or a PC, you can all play together.
Awesome. Chris or Sarah, would you like to give your opinion on what you guys think the next market game is going to be?
I mean, I would agree with, the other panelists here. Warzone's definitely hot in the streets, and Valorant is growing. I think Pete and I are part of the Gulag gang in our company happy hours.
Spend all our time in the gulag, yeah.
But yeah, no, I would agree with them based on what I've been seeing.
I think it's very interesting to see how everything around gaming evolves, such as Las Vegas is starting to really look into gambling and sports betting on tournaments, which is an interesting. I come from the Las Vegas casino area, like doing events in casinos, so gaming is very different for me. So it's really interesting to see that there are boards being put together on how do they have the integrity so that they can do sports betting, so that people aren't throwing games. So I'm really interested to see how that's going to shake out.